But welcome. I'm Jay Combs, a VP of Marketing at ModelOp, and joining me is Dave Trier, a VP of Product. Today, we're going to unpack what we're calling the AI time to market quagmire. And so these are the challenges you have to navigate when taking AI initiatives from idea to production, achieving ROI, and scaling. And this is based on the findings from our 2025 AI governance benchmark report. There's a lot to cover, so we're going to go quickly, but again, we'll be sending out this presentation and recording afterwards. So the idea for doing this report came from the question on how are enterprises actually keeping pace with the accelerating rate of AI and the AI ecosystem. Third-party vendor models, agents, software embedded with AI. And beyond just the tech changes, there's the change to the business model. Agents are often consumption-based. And so me in marketing, I have dozens of Gen AI or agent use cases that I could potentially use. But even for initiatives with low risk, like marketing, there's still issues that need to be controlled. Consider like a agent force, sales agent on your website that could get throttled, and you could potentially rack up massive bills with Salesforce. Now scale that up to higher risk use cases in HR, in healthcare, and financial services, and that lack of control can be really scary. So that leads us to the question: are you scaling risk or are you scaling innovation? And this is what our report dives into. So we partnered with Crinium Global Intelligence, and we surveyed 100 senior AI and data executives across a variety of industries to get their insights on both their ambitions related to AI and their ability to execute in bringing those initiatives to market. So this is the report. You can download it here on the link. If you really want to download it right now, you can go to the website. But again, we'll send over the recording after the webinar. All right. So a couple key findings, but the biggest really insight is really everyone's invested in AI, but few are realizing the value at scale. And there's actually important nuance here, so we're going to talk through that. We're going to talk through the current state of AI initiatives and the failure of operationalization, where enterprises are struggling and why, and what strategic shifts can be made to overcome these challenges. So I'm going to check the chat real quick. I see something in the chat. Okay, great. Love it. Cool. All right. So let's go to the first finding. So there are many, many use cases being proposed, and what you're looking at is a chart that shows the different life cycle stages that a AI initiative or model can go through from proposal to production. And you can see it's very heavily weighted in terms of the number of ideas or use cases in the proposal phase. Whereas if you look at production, there's only a handful in production now. And some of that's, obviously, new technology comes out. Enterprises generally take a little longer to do things. And so this just might be the natural progression of ideas coming to market. But I think there are some friction points that might be worth, talking about or diving into. And this is one of the reasons I have Dave on the call. He's talking to customers on Fortune 500 companies every day on this topic. So Dave, I'd love for your insight onto why you think there's so many proposed AI use cases or initiatives, but so few in production right now.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Appreciate it, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining. So to answer your question, so first off, when it comes to AI or ML or just data science in general, there are always going to be a number of use cases that are proposed that may not make it in there. That's just part of the innovation cycle. But because of the staggering number that are stuck in the left-hand side, if you will, there's actually brings to bear what the frictions, as Jay mentioned, overall. Oftentimes, this comes down to one major bullet point, if you will, which is this: how do we have a consistent way to ensure that we move from idea into production in a way that all the different stakeholders can trust that if we go through this process, that we can ensure that this AI is going to be used effectively, it's not going to cause any undue risk, etc. So Jay, really at the highest level, it's just making sure that there's a consistent blueprint, if you will, to move from idea through the reviews and QA and productionization into usage, that all the different parties, legal, risk, compliance, data, IT, security, can trust and ensure that if we go through this process, then we are assured that we are doing everything we can to help to mitigate any risk around it.
Yeah, I think a good phrase for that is operational readiness. Like, how prepared are we to do this? And I do think on top of that, there's another idea that Skip McCormick shares. So Skip McCormick is the current CTO of Cornerstone Technologies, but he also spent a lot of time as managing director of Bank of New York Mellon. And he's raising the question of, how do you know which AI use cases to accelerate? How do you know which ones to retire? Which ones are going to be the most profitable? Which ones do customers even care about? And actually, the Wall Street Journal, just around the time we released this report, had a very similar article that came out that kind of dove into that question around why companies are struggling to drive return on investment for AI initiatives. And it really came down to a couple things, but one of those things was the productivity paradox, right? Like, you're getting maybe some incremental savings from AI initiatives, but to really get the value of it, you got to scale them up, and that's going to take some time. So while only a few companies have invested, that they have said that they've actually scaled their investment, 43% report that they're still in the pilot stage. So that operational readiness point that Dave pointed out is really, really critical to being prepared to scale, so that you can capture that ROI as you start identifying those key use cases. But the other thing is being able to track and align your initiatives to key KPIs and metrics, so you know what is working, what isn't working. So that ability to track and monitor not just the performance of the models, but the value of those models is really, really important. All right, let's keep rolling here. So the second key finding that we came across was the long lead times it takes to bring generative AI initiatives to market. For most folks, 56% can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months to go from idea intake to put into production and being used. And that seems like a really long time for a technology that is evolving so quickly. And so I know there's a lot of things that have to happen at the enterprise level, right? Large enterprises, it just takes time to do some of the stuff. There's use case review, there's risk tiering, there's data and asset traceability, reviews for security and privacy, production approval, the ongoing monitoring and auditing. But they've taken a deeper dive. Like, are there some friction points that folks need to be thinking about, whether it's manual processes, fragmented systems, or other friction points that maybe might not be so obvious when you've got a great AI idea and want to bring it to market?
Absolutely. I think the biggest one it starts at is just the unknown, right? The unknown of the different technologies, the unknown of what are the different processes that we need to go through, the unknown of what stakeholders need to be involved, what systems that we need to touch. So as I mentioned previously, it just comes down to, well, if you don't know, naturally everything's going to slow down, and it becomes a manual process. You're going to have to reach out to 5 different people that say, well, I'm not sure, reach out to these other 5 people. Okay, well, you need this review. Oh, wait a second, you're trying to, this is a vendor model, so you need to get procurement involved. So it's that uncertainty, that unknown in the process, that it really is the start of why it takes longer. Because of that, it results in manual processes. But from there, then it goes into, well, you actually do need, especially for the higher risk models or even medium risk models, you do need to involve different reviews, different stakeholders, different systems as part of it. You need to make sure that if it has PII or any customer or consumer data, that you actually are doing a proper review of the usage of that data, the proper security around it, et cetera. So again, depending on the situation, you run into, and depending on the risk tiering the model, you'll run into additional steps that you need to take. And if you don't have something that's fully defined, an end-to-end life cycle that's defined, that goes in, takes the appropriate steps at the right point in the process, reaching out to the right stakeholders, the right different systems that are involved, that becomes an unwieldy, a manual, and therefore slow process. So again, it first starts with just nailing down that blueprint that you want to shepherd any new AI solution through the full process from inception all the way through usage and eventual retirement. So it starts there, and then aligning the different stakeholders, connecting the different systems to make something that is automated, consistent, and of course auditable, which I'm sure we'll talk about soon.
Yeah, we definitely will. But hold on to the auditable thought. Skip has actually joined the webinar, and he made the comment that folks can get, or projects can get stuck in perpetual beta, quote unquote, because the governance situation is still so dodgy, or maybe the operational readiness isn't there. And, again, for me, even looking at low risk use cases around marketing, the potential to run up massive bills, or, other concerns related to, data, that can be really, really unnerving. And so sometimes it is easier to just continue in that testing or beta phase before really ramping it up, just due to, the risks and the lack of that operational readiness, or maybe you don't know where to go next. Dave, I don't know if you've heard anything like that before, but interesting point from Skip.
Yeah, the perpetual beta is just because of the fact that it comes back to my original comment of just that, well, not all the different teams are sure that we can trust and have assurance that this is not going to cause any issues. So they said, you know what, we're good to keep it in a pilot stage or beta stage, but we're not quite ready to sign off on the dotted line that, yes, you can proceed out into production. So again, it just comes back to alignment, consistency, collection of the relevant inputs, evidence, process, and auditability around it to make sure that everybody can, again, trust that this is something that we can go ahead and use, and that we have any of the risks that may occur, that we have a mitigation plan around those.
Yeah. One of the other things, to kind of maybe back up some of these ideas of why the operational readiness isn't there, the challenge to getting there. There are some perceived hurdles to getting to governance. And that was one of the questions we asked in the survey. And, the top four are really interesting, like trying to integrate fragmented systems, replacing or scaling manual processes, administrative burdens, regulatory compliance hurdles, all the typical change management concerns that I think make it challenging for folks to tackle big projects or get that operational readiness. It's not really a lack of buy-in or prioritization, although, this kind of came up. If you look on the right side, those really aren't the big reasons. It's really kind of those structural challenges that have been in place. Hey, we've been doing things for a while. Now we've got all this new technology and new risk that we have to handle. We've got to change our structure and thinking to do it. And that is the challenge. So those hurdles, I think, are very real in getting to that operational readiness. But it's something that can't wait. Dave, I don't know if you have any anecdotes on just the urgency around this, or kind of the fear like, hey, maybe we can push this off to next year. But from the headlines I'm seeing in the Wall Street Journal, from a variety, financial services or healthcare companies, like the urgency is now. Like, this is something that can't wait till next year.
Absolutely. Again, the thing with generative AI that's very impressive, if you will, and around this is that it touches every aspect of every single organization. In the past, it was basically when you want to use AI or ML is part of the COE, a data science COE or AI COE. But now with generative AI, everybody wants to use it. Sales, marketing, finance, HR, everybody wants to use it. So the demand, the pressure to use it is really necessitating that you have something that is, again, consistent, scalable, the right level of governance. That Mike Dillon actually just made a great comment that you can have too much governance based on the situation. So it's the right level of governance, the Goldilocks of governance, as I like to say. Not too much, not too little, but the right amount based on the scenario that you have. For high risk models, you need something a little more arduous. Low risk, you can take a more streamlined path, if you will. So again, it's making sure that you are having something that's defined, consistent, that it has the right level of governance based on the scenario, but ultimately it has to be there. Otherwise, again, with all this demand, it's just going to slow to a halt your innovation. And with the demand across all those different teams, that's just not possible anymore. You have to address this.
Yeah, and Michael Dillon, thank you for that comment. That's really, really important. Yeah, thanks for bringing that. Okay, so one of those things. So one of those perceived barriers was the fragmented systems. Let's start with one of the first systems or elements to the lifecycle process with use case intake or idea intake for the AI lifecycle process. So we asked folks how many different tools they're using for use case intake, and the answer was multiple ones. On average, respondents were saying they have at least 2.4 different systems or method for use case intake. And so at the very beginning of the life cycle, we've got this kind of fragmented approach that might have downstream impacts into visibility and orchestration later on. Dave, like when you're talking to folks in the market, Fortune 500 companies, at the very beginning of the lifecycle process, like what impact does, a fragmentation in the approach take this early in the process? How does that impact the downstream flow or operational readiness for lifecycle management?
Yeah, we see this all the time. First and foremost causes confusion, right? So do I go to ServiceNow to put in a application as part of my AI use case? Do I go to a SharePoint site? Do I go to a Confluence site? So first off, just causes confusion. Where am I supposed to go? If I want to I have this great idea for a generative AI use case, and I want to get going. I want to get going quickly, but I don't know where to go and fill it out. And then even worse, I go fill out on one system and then I have to duplicate a bunch of information to another one and then to a third one. And I'm just questioning like, well, why do I need to do all this, right? What's the point? So first off, causes confusion. Second, it causes duplicative information that often is difficult to keep in sync and or becomes out of date and stale. So then you're trying to report on this and you don't know where to go to. And then the third really point around this is that now you have multiple management points, right? So you have to have teams that are keeping up to date these different areas, each different site, and it's a manual process as part of it. And as Skip rightfully points out in the chat just now, thank you, Skip, is that when you get an audit that's called, whether it's internal or external, where do you go? What's your actual system of record? Is it your CMS? Is it your ITSM? Where do you go? Great comment, Skip. So again, if you think about confusion, duplicative efforts, management and overhead around it, and lastly around the audit of just where do you go for that system of record?
Yeah, really challenging. I told you we'd come back to the assurance piece that you mentioned earlier, Dave. So another question we asked the group of leaders was, how does your organization demonstrate assurance or that your Gen AI initiatives are performing as expected, i.e. assurance, right? How do you make sure they're performing within the bounds of what you'd expect them to do? And multiple choice question. And there are a couple options. One is, hey, this can be done at the business level or the team level, kind of fragmented across different teams for testing and documentation and reporting. Or maybe the testing and documentation is done at that team or the business level, and reporting is all done at the enterprise level, or maybe it's all done at the enterprise level. And a couple other options, but everybody came back with one of those kind of three things. And the most common one was that testing and documentation done at the line of business or team level, but reporting is done at the enterprise level. And so this is kind of an interesting, kind of fragmented tiered approach. Dave, like, what do you think about this, this particular common approach that the respondents of the survey are doing? Are there pros and cons to doing it that way? Is it better than the other ways? Like, what are you seeing in the market?
Right. So if you think about the ultimate goal here, there's really, first and foremost, what you need at the enterprise level is an understanding of the risks. Everybody needs to understand what are the risks that are involved, what's the performance of the given AI system, and again, is it driving value, right? You want to have visibility into what's being used, the risk, and is it actually driving value? So in that way, that understanding needs to be at an enterprise level. Now, you may need to do testing and monitoring that as a model owner or a solution owner, you may want to do that at a low level, and that can be done at a department or team level, just to understand, the real mechanics and the day-to-day metrics around this AI solution. So that I generally see done at a team level. But again, if you think about what you need at the enterprise level, you need the visibility, into the risk, and is it driving value? So you need to make sure that you're filtering up the most important metrics that are being done for testing, for monitoring, for documentation. Those do need to be surfaced up at an enterprise level so that you can truly have an AI portfolio view of what I'm using, what are the risks, and where am I getting the most value out of it. So I do see that second bucket as fairly common, but the most important thing that is often missed is to make sure that you flow to the enterprise level the key metrics that are driving the inherent risks, to make sure that those risks aren't turning into issues, I should say, and making sure that you have, again, the right mitigation approach should they come into actually coming into fruition.
Yeah. On top of that, I think Nancy raises a really good point around just terminology and vocabulary and what that can mean across different teams or geos or business units. and normalizing that to make sure everybody's comparing apples to apples. Like that is a real challenge. I mean, regardless of whether you're dealing with Gen AI, but anything across large enterprise. And I think especially so with the technology that's moving so quickly and metrics with different technologies that you're trying to compare, it can be really, really, really challenging. So Nancy, thanks for raising that point.
Yeah, and that's part of that blueprint that I mentioned, Jay. And Nancy, that's an excellent point. The blueprint is around everybody has a common understanding of what's necessary at the enterprise level. That starts with terminology. It starts with how you're doing your risk tiering. It starts with how you're categorizing it for reporting purposes across teams and departments and categories of AI solutions, if you will. And then it moves into the process side and make sure you have that blueprints for that process of how you move it from inception to usage, inclusive of what stakeholders, what reviews, what evidence, artifacts, et cetera, are needed. So totally agree, Nancy.
All right, let's keep rolling here. Moving the last few minutes. There's the question of traceability. The quote on the previous slide of Skip saying, hey, it's hard to get data scientists to document what's going on, what data they based everything on, what tests they've run. And so I think when you're doing those things, you're creating evidence, but also as you put these use cases into production, you want to be able to tie that use case back to the source code, the prompt templates, the guardrails, the tests that were run. That can be really, really challenging. And the interesting thing on this data that we have here is that more than 50%, regardless of what level of traceability you have, more than 15%, less than 50% have high confidence or complete confidence, which means most have moderate confidence or limited confidence. And I think in these kind of surveys, it's always kind of tough to gauge what that means. Everybody might have a little different definition of it. But the fact that most are in that moderate or limited confidence bucket raises, some concerns like of how challenging it is to get this traceability or auditability. Dave, what kind of challenges are you seeing around traceability in the market?
That's just complete lack of traceability, to be quite honest. So there are some that focus on, all right, I just want to have an entry or record of here's an AI solution, and then here's a document. That's a good start, but what happens when an audit calls and said, okay, well, I need you to prove, that in a reproducible fashion, what data sets you used to go and test this to show that there wasn't any undue bias or that you put it through its paces. I wanted to see how you were able to show that there was stress testing done, right? So how do you do that backwards looking view to say, okay, well, here's the exact version of this solution that was running on August 1st of 2024, and here's the data sets we used for testing, here's who signed off on it, here's where with their security view. So having that level of traceability, both forward and backwards, is often missed. And it's actually a very difficult problem to solve when you think about now with generative AI, but just even before with AI and ML, you had a variety of different technologies that are being used. So being able to trace back across the different data science tools, the different frameworks, languages, data systems that are part of it as part of the common heterogeneous enterprise right now, right? How do you ensure you have traceability to answer those simple questions around what model was running or what solution was running on August 1st of 2024, and show me the evidence that you tested it, what were those test results and approvals thereof? So like I said, Jay, it's actually something that is just a gap in most markets, and it's getting worse with the variety of technologies that most enterprises are adopting.
Yeah, you can see that in the data for sure. All right, and so let's keep rolling here into the last 5 minutes. So this was a really interesting response to the question of who owns AI governance, specifically who's controlling the program, budgets, and ultimately accountable for AI initiatives. And I think when you hear the term governance, a lot of times you think legal, compliance, and risk teams. But that the response was only 10%. And looking at the percentages here, if you do the addition, it's well more than 100%, which means there's kind of multiple, ownership areas, which means there's a multidisciplinary approach here. But the big buckets of ownership here are chief innovation officer, chief data analytics, and chief information officer, with a smattering of cross-functional committees or centers of excellence or AI councils. And so that, multidisciplinary approach, but starting to see accountability with that CIO, DNA, and innovation areas is really, really interesting, and maybe something that most folks might might have had a different view of governance in the past, but that shift to innovation it was a really interesting finding that we got from the report. So not that these, the lines of business owners and other folks aren't still really, really important a part of it, but clearly we're seeing some consolidation up at that innovation and CIO level. And then finally, budget. So around, how much is there specific budget allocated for AI governance in the upcoming year? The answer is yes. Everybody has budgeted for AI governance, and over a third have budgeted more than $1 million annually for that. So just to say, hey, this is on our minds. This is becoming a priority or is a priority. We need to put the dollars behind it to make it happen. So that shift to innovation, the shift in budgets is a really interesting finding that we've seen this year. And then that kind of wraps it up. We can talk about some of the prescriptions for change that we've seen, what we talked about in here. The first one, at the beginning of the report, we talked about how long it takes to bring AI initiatives to production due to operational readiness issues. There's rapid change. There's the pressure to, get things to market for competitive advantage. But those challenges in bringing it to market, 6 to 18 months, and that backlog of proposed use cases, clearly something needs to be done to help bring those to market more effectively. And you can start in some simple areas. One is just simplifying that use case intake process that we talked about, consolidating some of those systems and anticipating governance challenges early on, making sure you're doing that governance and control work up front to reduce the time to market and bring ROI forward. Second thing is, applying lifecycle management at the enterprise level, right? Considering enforcing AI assurance, making sure there's that enterprise common language and blueprints to make sure everybody's clear in the organization how that's working, where there's clear ownership and accountability. That can help streamline the process, but having it at the enterprise level blueprint is really, really important. What we're seeing leaders starting to do more and more. And then finally, having leaders take the reins on AI lifecycle automation and governance, ensuring that leadership is strong with clear ownership. If there is a multidisciplinary team, making sure there's understanding of how the council works, Center of Excellence works, and assessing whether your teams have the, who's got the capacity to monitor and control the use cases as they go live and prepare for audits and reports, so that there's not, like Dave, I think, said early on, audit search parties can happen when you put something in production and forget about it. So making sure that there's clear accountability and folks are taking the lead on it is really important. And then this wouldn't be a ModelOp webinar without a quick little word from ModelOp. We just talked about a lot of the challenges and then what can be done to make that strategic shift. And ModelOp can help you make that strategic shift. It's the AI control tower for enterprises, and can help you with traditional AI and ML, Gen AI, agents, and beyond. We're always preparing and seeing around the corner for what's coming next. ModelOp is the leading AI lifecycle automation governance software. We can help you really in 3 different ways tackle the challenges that we covered in this webinar. Number one is visibility, right? Executives, leaders need clear view into every model, every use case, where it lives, what it does, and ultimately what its value is. ModelOp provides that. Control, optimizing that lifecycle automation to your internal policies, external policies, whether you're in healthcare, financial services, dealing with SR 11.7 or implementing frameworks like NIST AI RMF. We help you consistently enforce those policies across the entire lifecycle. And finally, assurance, making sure that your models are consistently and continuously monitored, showing they're performing compliantly and they're auditable and they're delivering the right value. So with that, that's it. Thank you guys. We're 1 minute over. I will send out the recording and the presentation so you have it for your records. I encourage you to download the report. Please read it. And we'll have another webinar in June. We'll be announcing that shortly. And then in the meantime, have a great rest of May. And thanks for joining. Bye, everybody.